Hello, and welcome to Lit by Moonlight, where it's not a phase to be trained by your bloodthirsty nun and to exact revenge on your father's killers.
Do it all the time. Bringing that back. This week we are talking about Our Flag Means Death, Season 1, Episode 7. This is happening.
This is happening.
It is happening.
I'm Emberlyn, and the only god I recognize is Jennifer Coolidge.
Ooh. That's a good one. I'm Caitlin, and I have a craving for oranges for no apparent reason.
Is it because my earrings today are oranges?
Oh, yes it is.
Both peeled and unpeeled.
Wow.
I'd
Wait,
like
let me
to
see
give
the
the
other one.
girls variety.
Nice.
Peeled, right?
Yeah.
Unpeeled. Peeled, unpeeled. Peeled, unpeeled.
Well, that's the podcast. I'm entertained.
So, Caitlin, this week in This Is Happening, things did indeed happen.
They did happen.
Steed decides to make a day out of being in St. Augustine, which is actually modern-day Florida, and whilst in Florida / St. Augustine, there are no Florida men because it's the 1600s, so less.
I'm sure they're out there somewhere.
Would Jim's aunt count as a Florida man? Because she definitely had some bloodthirsty vibes that I think you can only attribute
Jim's
to
Nana?
Florida men. Yeah.
Yeah, probably. She's a Florida nun.
Florida nun. Florida nun exacts revenge on bloodthirsty killers whilst being a bloodthirsty killer. So while on the island, Stede basically buys what's can only be described as like a scam or like a gimmicky map from some lady selling maps and assumes in his naivety that said map is going to lead them to a treasure.
Of course.
So he pulls Ed out of a super grumpy stupor to go out and look for the treasure that this map is allegedly going to lead them to, along with Lucius. Meanwhile, the rest of the crew is going to go and find oranges to help the Swede, who is experiencing a case of scurvy. And now you know scurvy can be treated with oranges.
Yay,
so
vitamin C.
Vitamin C. So, Caitlin, what hooked you in this episode?
So my hook for this episode was the fact that we were getting backstory on Jim, which I
Yeah.
thought was really cool because obviously we got backstory on Steed throughout the beginning. We got a little bit on Ed in like the last episode, which you kind of expect from your two like leads.
Yeah.
But to get a backstory on one of the crew members was really cool because I always am curious as to where do they come from and how do they get aboard the Revenge and like what's their story. Like we've talked about Buttons, like where did he come from?
God, would I like to know where Buttons came from.
Yeah, I mean he came from the sea for
What?
sure.
Yeah, literally, like, what whale's carcass did he crawl out of?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I don't think we'll ever get a full backstory on every crew member, but like the more we know about them, the more I am curious. But to get that about Jim this episode was really cool because it was really like insightful as to who they are and like maybe why they're in disguise because they ended up killing somebody, and we got more of their relationship with Oluwande, which I'm a big fan of, and to see that kind of grow a little bit this episode more than it has this season was really fun to watch.
Yeah, I really enjoyed watching that too. I wasn't expecting to get anyone else's backstory besides maybe like Steed's and then Ed's. So to see them pulling in some of Jim's experiences is really exciting because Jim is definitely one of the more mysterious characters in the show. We don't know a lot about them. Well, we do now more than before. But I remember before this when Jim first showed up to Jackie's place and we learned that Jim had killed one of Jackie's husbands. I was like, why?
Yeah.
Why? Like, because I mean, at first glance, you might think, okay, Jim is definitely has like big cat energy. They definitely seem like they like to cause chaos, but maybe that chaos is motivated by something deeper. In this episode, we learned that. For me, I was hooked from the beginning just because at this point, and definitely in the first watch, and once again, I was like very immersed in Steed and Ed's dynamic. So when Steed already knew Ed's tea preferences, I was like kicking my foot up like, ooh, like twirling my hair, kicking my feet on my bed. Because I think that it's just another example of how it seems like they work really well together. And I feel like that's what this season does really well, is kind of show how compatible they are. Yeah. Maybe unexpectedly. So to see that was just
a delicious dish.
Yes, a delicious dish indeed.
I also like that was improvised too. Dollop of milk and 7 sugars.
7 sugars. So like, of course he would like that. Like, that's such not to say that's like a child's order, but there's something so like silly about that. Like,
I like that he likes the sweet things. I think it's cute.
It speaks to his capacity to like fine things, you know, and like to be like, I guess, like cherished and spoiled a little bit. So I also liked that. Did you have a favorite part of episode 7?
Yeah, I really liked the scene with Lucius telling Ed that Stede likes him. And I really liked one that, like, Lucius throughout this entire episode is trying so hard to be like, yeah, Stede, this is a great idea. Like, really support him, even though Ed is clearly, like, hangry and wants to go back to the ship.
Right.
And doesn't want to be on a big outdoorsy adventure.
Right.
So his effort throughout the whole thing to be like, and who says treasure maps aren't useless?
Yeah.
And like all of that leading up to it, and just you can see as Ed starts like complaining to him about like after like the treasure map burns up, and he's like, oh, he's gonna be moping all the way back to the ship, and just Lucius to turn to Ed and be like, don't be a dick about it.
Like, actually,
it's just like so great, because I feel like no one has really kind of said that to, or like talked to Ed like that,
right?
With the exception of like maybe Izzy, but as far as like people who like see him as like this, you know, pirate captain and like who's in charge, like I don't think anyone else on the crew would ever like have the balls to talk to Ed like that.
Yeah. So
for Lucius to do that, and for like it to be said out loud that Stede likes Ed for the first time in the show, even though it is by another character, I remember watching it being like, yeah, does he?
Yeah, and it's interesting contrast, because you have Izzy in the prior episode telling Stede that Ed adores him, and then vice versa. It seems like in both cases you kind of have the person that seems like they're maybe closest on board to each captain telling the other person that. There's something so interesting about that.
That's a good point. I never thought about it like that. But yeah, to just have that like be told to his face that like he did all of this for you. So like, you know, buck up and like admit your feelings that you like I also like that Lucius just like, he likes you and you like him. Stop beating around the bush and just go for it. Like I really liked that, and just like Ed's face journey of being like annoyed with Lucius to like turning to look at Stede and be like, crap, I do like it. Because maybe like not that like Ed doesn't realize that he likes Stede, because I think he knows at this point, but just for the fact that it's apparent to another person, I think is a lot. So just for Ed to hear that from another person and then like continue on the episode with the big hard eyes that he has for Stede, and also just Lucius's line of, oh my god, this is happening, because he's kind of like the audience at that point. He's like the audience stand-in, so it's like everything that we've been watching this entire time, we're like, it is happening. It was, yeah. I like that this is happening is a line in the show, and also the name of the episode, because I think in a lot of ways it's not just like that Lucius is a stand-in for the audience, it's also that this is validation for the audience that this is in fact happening. Yeah. Because if you had any doubts at this point, like, oh, maybe we're just like being queer baited, or maybe like there's just like they just a really close friendship or like something like that. This is kind of that forefront, like, break the fourth wall acknowledgement that like this is happening. Yeah, like it's the title of the episode. It's happening.
Yeah. I actually have the exact line there that Lucius uses on Ed, and he says, everyone is worried all the time if they're interesting or adventurous enough for you, and that bizarre little man over there likes you and you like him. I really like that quote, because I think, as you said, this is the first time that someone's probably ever talked to Ed that way. Yeah. For him to hear that from somebody who's maybe otherwise supposed to be praising him, like the rest of the crew has the entire season, it must be humbling. The other thing I like about this part of the show is that you already are starting to notice that Ed is doing this thing that I think we see a lot of people do when they like somebody is like he's kind of repressing those feelings and pushing Stede away a little bit. Yeah. So at the beginning of the episode, he's talking a lot about how like, oh, like I've spent enough time here. Like I should probably head out soon. Like, you know, I've been here. I've overstayed my welcome. I stayed longer than I was supposed to. I should probably go. And then like he goes out on this little journey with Stede and continues to act like kind of a dick. And I'm not justifying that. I'm just saying it really seems like he's pushing Stede away because maybe he does realize that he really likes him. Yeah. And maybe he's like, oh, like feeling a little bit like, well, this could never happen, you know?
Yeah, especially since he's not really getting anything from Stede for Stede to say, yeah, I feel the same way about you. Like he's gotten nothing from him up until this point, which I feel like is kind of why, like I feel like in Ed's mind at this point, he's just like, well, there's no other reason for me to stay here because the guy I like doesn't seem to like me back, so why should I stay for that? And I'll just leave.
Right.
So
right. It's definitely something that somebody only does when they have super low self-worth. So.
Yeah. I think another favorite line that I never caught until like one of the first times I rewatched this show was when Stede is talking to the crew after the whole orange conversation and saying like, anybody got any ideas, like something that'll impress the world-weary adventure type? I'm just like, he's clearly like, I'm trying to impress Ed here, like give me a good idea. Like I need to keep him on board, right? But even though he doesn't like necessarily know or understand quite why he might want him on board yet, he knows he likes his presence.
So he's a friend. So that was one of my favorite parts of the episode. Yeah. But I have some honorable mentions as well. I think one of my other favorites is when Stede finds the moth. And the contrast of that is when Ed attacks the snake. Because it just goes to show Stede is clearly like this very delicate, lovely, flowery type of person who, oh, look, a moth. Meanwhile, Ed, once again, has like big cat energy. He's just like attacking immediately. Murder, kill, die, murdered, kill, die, you know? It's like very funny. It's the same as like the contrast between like, hand over the goods, dear boy, or I should be obliged to wreak vengeance versus like, the next one goes through your fucking eyeball. Yeah. There's definitely this great like sun and moon / like soft versus hardy like contrast between them. I think those opposite attract relationships are some of my favorites. Yeah, same. So that's why I really like this show a lot, is because of that dynamic between them. So this episode, Caitlin, I think I have an idea of where you might be going with the answer to this question, but were there any immediate standout characters for you?
Yeah, so first I said Jim, mainly because I loved learning more about them and like why they're on this path of revenge, and just I feel like Vico Ortiz's performance in this was just really good. Yeah. I also, what I love about Jim is they seem like, you know, like this tough, mysterious person, but then they also say lines like oodles of revenge. Which is one of my favorite lines ever. Yes. And I just love like, see, Nana, I got oodles of revenge. Like, it's just funny. But I also really enjoyed Lucius in this episode because of like everything I said before of him just being like the guy to be like, all right, you guys like each other, let's get together, please, or please see this, like this is agony. And then just his like constant like trying to be really optimistic about the whole experience, even though it maybe himself like he doesn't want to be on the adventure. But it was just really fun to like watch their dynamic and everything. Right. Who was yours?
I'd say Lucius was definitely mine as well. It's maybe the first time, other than with Buttons, who's been pretty loyal to Stede as his first mate, that I've seen someone else like really protect Stede. Yeah. And that is something that I have gone on to really love and appreciate about this show, is that Lucius seems to like see that like he's got two baby gays in his in his presence, not in the sense that they're both young, but in the sense that maybe Stede is like coming to terms with his sexuality and like feels the need to be super protective of Stede. Mm-hmm. So I really liked that. I also felt like his outfit was such a slay this season. Like, I don't know, the long pants and like the scarf. I was like, yes!
That also reminded me of how in episode 1, like he kind of seems like to be on the same level as the crew of being like, oh my God, this guy is ridiculous. And like a really shit captain. But then the second that he hears about like how the badmintons like bullied him as a kid, you can see his face kind of change and be like, oh, he needs to be protected.
He's just like this.
He's just like this. And I really like that about Lucius.
Because of that, and then because of his protectiveness with Stede, and then just because of his lines with Ed, and because of just all of his wisecracks during this episode, I thought he was my favorite. But one note on Jim I wanted to add was I love that their favorite color is teal.
Yeah.
And that's the color of Oluwande's earring.
I love that detail so much. Like, it says so much with just one word, just being like teal. Yeah. Favorite color is teal, and then you turn and you see Oluwande's like earring. I'm like,
yeah,
nice.
This is a great piece of art going around, Twitter, Tumblr, all of the places. And it's like a mock of girl with the pearl earring, but instead it's Ollie with the teal
I've
earring.
seen that. It's so pretty.
It's so cool. So if I could find that, we'll have to link it in the episode notes because it's really beautiful.
The artwork in this fandom is incredible.
Yeah, I think there's like a lot of thoughtful people here.
Yeah. Like, as someone who can't draw to save their life, wow. It's incredible.
So were there any favorite quotes for you from this episode?
So I already mentioned Oodles of Revenge, which is great.
Good one.
I really love the Swede saying, Jim, the teeth, they don't go back in. Yeah. You need to help. And then just like Oluwande telling him to go for a run. It's really fun.
Yeah.
And then just the distant screaming of, they don't go back in. It's really good. I also really liked Lucius going, oh, strong question, love that. Because it felt like something that it could have been scripted, but I also felt like improv in a way, just because of how like it was almost like kind of off the cuff that he said that. I don't know. It was just, I really liked that observation, and I thought it was funny. One of my very favorite lines is when Oluwande tells Jim, I could be family to them, and because he's saying I love you.
Yep.
And it's not a line, but I like it when he tips their hat.
Yeah.
When they leave. I think that's the cutest freaking thing ever.
Yeah. I noted that too is like one of the things that made me love the ending of this is he was just like, blink.
Yeah. So cute.
Because the alternative would have been kissing them, and that moment had passed. So that was like
it was
the
a
only
very
way.
You and me and our friend Stede.
Yeah. So that was the only way they could really say goodbye at that point, because it felt like that vibe had been killed.
Yeah.
By Stede, who showed up with his map, ready to dig out a petrified orange from under Jim's tree. Were there any others for you?
I really liked Oluwande saying, I'm going to try and undo some of the damage from that conversation, just because I thought it was funny.
Yeah.
And then, coming, Nana. Coming for some cake.
That was on my list, too.
Yeah, what's yours?
Definitely on your feet. We're having a day.
Yes.
Is one of my favorite lines when Stede says that. I think it's like the mom who's trying to put together a fun day for her kids when they're all home from the holidays. And I just love that line. Yeah. It's something I actually say to myself a lot when I have to motivate myself to like actually do the things I want to do during the day instead of stay in bed and stare at TikTok. And then when Lucius says the classic line, well, I guess the real treasure was our day spent together. Like, one of my favorites. It's always like, oh, the treasure is the friends we made along the way. Like, I love that joke. It's a good spoof. But if I hear it in a Marvel movie, I will be sad. Yeah. Then it's ruined.
Well, especially when it's followed up by Lucius. We spend every day together. Yeah. Treasure is the real treasure. Like, Steve's like, I don't give a shit about this. Like,
right.
I just found a petrified orange. Let's go.
Another one for me was when Jim says the old tree still had some fruit to give after all, because I think it serves as kind of the point for Jim where they become inspired to go on and finish their mission.
I like that.
Which I love. Like, when I first watched this episode, that line really stuck out to me because it sounded like they were definitely meditating in that moment. Like, oh, like maybe this isn't done yet. Maybe I can go on and avenge my father.
I never thought about it like that. I like
that one, and then I had so many at the very end, and that scene with Spanish Jackie and the English military and or the English Navy, I guess. They're on the sea, particulars. And Izzy, when Chauncey asks Spanish Jackie, like, are you Spanish? No. Then why do they call you Spanish Jackie? I don't know. And then when she responds, he broke my nose jar and his crew murdered one of my favorite husbands. And Chauncey's like, well, I didn't follow any of that.
I love that so
like, I have no context for any of these highly specific things that happened to you. Yeah. And then when they pull out the cat flag, the British Navy does, and she goes, is that a fucking cat?
It's so good.
I want more of them all together, almost. Like, I'm kind of sad there weren't more scenes with them, like, plotting.
I just love the commentating on the plots of the show so far.
I know.
Just, like, why are you called Spanish Jackie? And is that a cat? And no, I didn't follow any of that. That sounds bizarre. Right. Anyway, back to the point.
It's on the cusp of, like, breaking the fourth wall, but it's not. So, I'm a big fan.
The Spanish Jackie thing to me is, like, acknowledging like possible questions from fans watching it, being like, why is she called Spanish Jackie?
Why
and
is
they're
she
just
Spanish
like,
Jackie?
we don't know.
She just is.
Just go with it.
She's just a Spanish Jackie.
That's like one of my favorite things in any sort of media is when something happens, but like they don't really acknowledge it.
Right.
Or like, how is that possible? It just is. Move on. It's not important.
So Caitlin, how did the end treat you in this episode?
I really liked, again, like I always love it when it ends with like a little bit of conflict, because I feel like the past few episodes have just been like, wow, that was really nice.
Everything's so good.
Everything's nice. And then you're reminded, oh yeah, like there's actual stakes at some point here. Right. And there's this ever like this shadow of the English Navy is still like kind of settling over them, right, because they don't know it yet. But I really liked that this episode started and ended with Ed and Stede sharing a drink together with like their morning breakfast tea and then their brandy at the end of it. Mm-hmm. I think it's just really sweet because I feel like it also kind of establishes that that's something that they do together all the time.
It gives us a little sense that there's domesticity between
them.
them.
And I love domesticity. So just the fact that they both like decide like, oh, we'll be co-captains. Yeah. And like that's where they're gonna be. Like I feel like it was a good establishment of their dynamic as obviously as co-captains, but also in a way that like now that Ed knows and has been told that Stede likes him, that like maybe they'll be co-captains in like other ways hopefully as the episodes go forward, and hopefully there'll be like more instances of that because of they've established this dynamic on the ship, so maybe they can grow together as characters as the show goes on. So that I really liked that upon first watching it, where I'm like, oh cool, they figured it out, they know what they're gonna do,
like each other.
Yay!
Yeah, the end treated me the same way. There's something about their body language toward the beginning of the episode where it's like they're both close to each other, they're both like pointed toward each other, but bless you
the way you just stared.
They're both definitely like positioned toward each other, but they're not like, and they're standing kind of close. Yeah. But then at the end of the episode, when they're sharing brandy together, they're so close. They're basically like nearly leaning against each other on the couch.
Oh, it's so nice.
And they say co-captains almost at the same time. And I love that.
We finish each other's
sentences. Rats.
Co-captain.
We finish each other's co-captains. So yeah, I really, really like that. And I think it goes to show like how the relationship is forming, that they're clearly like in the depths of this friendship right now. Yeah. That could become more serious.
And I feel like it's good for the show at this point, because I feel like at this point you're like, okay, where do they go from here? Yeah. Like if you're watching it and you're like, I want these two to be together and I think that's what's happening here, but where is it going? And this episode kind of shows that like, yeah, this is happening.
Yeah.
Yeah. Making the title.
Yeah, I think the pacing in these episodes especially has been great. I think that just overall, the show does a really good job with pacing, because sometimes, you know, and I talked about this a little bit last episode or a couple episodes ago, but like sometimes two people get together and you just don't have to fall in love with their relationship and get comfortable with them.
Yeah,
in the same length of time that they've clearly gotten comfortable with each other. So I like that this hasn't necessarily been a slow burn, but there's certainly been like a very natural progression into their friendship and then maybe towards something else.
Yeah.
So that's all I'm going to say about that for now. I'm going to keep all my thoughts about that to myself until later. But before we close out this week's episode, Caitlin, I think it is time for us to rate it on our tier list.
Our tier list!
Whee!
Yay!
So before we dive in, I'm going to tell you what the tiers are, just in case you forgot.
Yeah.
So we have, I ate all of my house's drywall and the accompanying nails.
Yummy.
Delicious. Made me mentally ill, affectionate.
Nice.
We like that we're mentally ill. Neutral, like my pH levels. Made me mentally ill, foreboding.
Wow.
Ooh. And Riverdale Core.
Riverdale Core.
So where would you put this episode on the tier list?
It's hard because I know last week I said episode 6 my favorite, and that's true because it has everything. But this episode I think is my most rewatched, because it's just so comforting to me. It is comforting, yeah. I had a friend call themselves an episode 7 truther, which I think is hilarious, and I completely agree. It's another one of those episodes that's a good crew episode and a good Ed and Stede relationship episode. Right. That like it has everything I want from them. The crew being absolutely like silly and ridiculous with their orange mission, and then just Ed and Stede growing together. So I think I'm eating the drywall.
Okay.
Because of the whole scene with the picking the food out of the beard. So we were watching that going,
yeah.
You see this?
Yep.
So, and when I think about that, it makes me, really hungry for walls and nails.
Tasty.
Yeah. What about you?
This one's hard because it's definitely it's an episode that I'm fond of, but it's not really an episode that evokes anything from me. I think that Jim's backstory is super interesting.
Yeah.
I think like that the improvised bits about Blackbeard's bar and grill and other delicacies, I think those are all great, but this episode doesn't really hold a special place in my heart. So I'm going to say it's a neutral, like my pH levels.
Nice.
That ends this week's review of Our Flag Means Death, episode 7. This is happening.
This is happening.
Please join us next week when we review season 1, episode 8 of Our Flag Means Death. We go way back.
It's a pun.
I wonder if there'll be any seagulls involved.
I don't know.
Please join us then. Bye.